Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Core Collective series, a string of events that uncovers learning from aspiring leaders in the underscore core. We are thrilled to be having Sam King, CEO of Veracode, join us for our May Fireside Chat. Please give her a very warm welcome in the chat. Sam, thank you for joining us. We are so thrilled that you are here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Awesome. So just before we start, a few housekeeping rules. The goal of the event is really to gather collective learnings from our community. And so that includes you. So we hope you'll add to the conversation. Please add on any learnings in the chat throughout the event. And we've reserved about the last 20 minutes for Sam to specifically answer your questions. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A section. And if you want to ask her the question directly, raise your hand and we'll be able to show you on video to ask her. We're also live tweeting today, and we hope you'll join us there. You can find us @_VC on Twitter. And then lastly, if this is your first core event, welcome. You might be wondering what the underscore core is all about. So we'll drop a link in the chat that will share more information about this community of top entrepreneurs, up and coming talent, and domain experts who support each other as peers and help underscore throughout our investment process. And then through the core, founders receive the benefits of the right expertise from the right people at the right time. And then with that, I will hand it over to Lily Lyman, partner at _VC, to officially introduce Sam and kick off the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. It is a true honor to get to introduce and welcome Sam today. So Sam, thanks again for taking the time to join us. By quick introduction, I'm sure I won't do it full justice, but I will try a little bit on your background. But Sam is the Chief Executive Officer at Veracode. She previously served as General Manager following Veracode's acquisition by CA Technologies in 2017. And she was Veracode's Chief Strategy Officer prior to that. And she is recognized as an expert in application security and the emerging practice of DevSecOps. So I'm excited to spend more time talking about that specifically. But Sam is also an active member in the community and mentorship programs. She's worked with organizations such as Boston Product Management Association, Working Mothers Association, and I know personally that she's worked with many women and young professionals inside and outside of Veracode throughout her various positions. I personally benefited from that in a recent board training, so thank you for that. Sam is also a member of the board of directors of Progress Software, and she was recognized as one of the most influential corporate directors by Women's Inc. magazine, so that is very cool to see. So Sam, thanks for sitting down with us today. Excited to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Great. So one of the themes that I want to touch on today is shifts and transitions, because as I sort of reflect on your experience as a leader, you experienced some pretty significant organizational shifts right early in your tenure as leader of Veracode. So, in your time experience, you experienced, the 2017 acquisition of CA Technologies, then the 2018 acquisition of CA by Broadcom, and then a year later, Broadcom divesting Veracode. So it's, within an 18-month period, I think it was, you had 3 very significant organizational shifts. So I was curious, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be at the helm during those transitions? How did you manage the organization? And what were some of your biggest learnings as a leader through such significant shifts?
Yeah, great question. It was a little dizzying, I have to say. That's a lot of change to go through in an 18-month time period. Listen, for those of us that are in the technology industry, you know that change is constant, right? And in fact, if change is not happening, something might be amiss. So you get used to just dealing with constant change. But having said that, to have 3 owners for the company during a period of 18 months is, I'd say, a heavier dose of change than you even undertake under normal circumstances. And so for me, as we were going through those changes, what was important was to keep grounding our team in what has not changed. what is staying constant as we go through this time period. So, we had a very successful exit to CA in 2017. And we were prepared to be a business unit inside CA Technologies and build our business inside this larger organization. And we had made the decision to keep ourselves as an independent business unit while integrating where we needed to integrate, but really focusing on the business momentum that we had coming in. And then a year later, it was announced that Broadcom is acquiring CA. That came a little bit out of left field. What is a big, very successful hardware semiconductor company acquiring a software infrastructure company? And the funny thing for me was that we had just started our organizational integration into CA literally like 2 weeks before that announcement came out. And so the question was, who am I integrating with? Am I integrating with CA? Am I integrating with Broadcom? And then, of course, as things transpired, it made sense for Veracode to get divested out. And so just 18 months after we entered CA, we were bought by Thoma Bravo to become an independent company again. And, our valuation increased $330 million over the course of 18 months, which was not bad. But that's a lot for the company and employees to go through. So coming back to what didn't change, the thing I kept reminding our team of was our customers' expectations of us have not changed, right? Our customers still need us to deliver on software security. They need us to have great products, great services, great capabilities. They don't care, really. Neither should they, that we are going through these transitions as an organization. Our commitment to them is still the same. So part of the reason why I called upon that as something that had stayed constant is that, there's something different that makes every organization tick, right? And for Veracode, it is this sense of mission. From the early days in 2006, when we were founded, our team has really been passionate about this topic of securing the world's software. And software didn't become secure before or after we were bought by CA, before or after CA was bought by Broadcom, or before or after we became part of Thoma Bravo. So that hasn't changed. And because we care deeply about that mission and our commitment to customers hasn't changed, let's stay focused on that, right? And then during that time period, it's also important to remind people of their sense of agency, because it feels like you're losing control. These things are happening to you, right? Versus you being in the driver's seat. So that was the second thing that was important for me, is how do I restore a sense of agency? And, I talked to the team about competition is going to use each one of these changes as an opportunity to disrupt. They're going to go out there and weave a narrative about, they're going to be focused on internal changes and all of the stuff that comes right after an acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that shapes the narrative is what we do, not what competition says. So what's in the sphere of control? How can we keep performing at our best within what's in our sphere of control? Because that gives us a lot more leverage in our sphere of influence. And then through each one of these changes, we can drive a better and better position for the company. So those are really the two things for me to help the organization manage through these transitions. And, we grew our business tremendously during that 18-month time period. We moved into profitability as a company, and we've certainly increased the valuation. And so those were things that served us well during that time period.
I love those lessons. What I heard was sort of saying, focused on mission, reinforcing the ability to have agency and control, not worrying about the competition. I like the point that your customers don't care who owns you or sort of what's going on.
Yeah, in fact, I remember this distinct moment in time where I was having a meeting with a chief information security officer of a very large financial services firm. And he looked at me and he said, Sam, I know you just got acquired, but essentially, don't screw this up for me, because I'm relying on you and your team to not get distracted. Right? And to just keep reminding our team through stories like that we've made a commitment and we have to come through on that commitment was a really good way to stay focused when there was all this change brewing.
I love that focus. And beyond sort of reemphasizing these principles, was there anything in particular or tactical from an organization or even your executive team management to reinforce these ideas of stay true to the mission, focus on your agency that you do have? Any other examples of things?
Yeah, constant communication, right? Like communicate. And that took the shape of the executive team, myself, flying out to each one of our locations, getting in front of people, right? We had a team in Singapore, we had a team in Prague, we have a team in London, we have a team in Burlington, and then we had remote employees, getting out to each one of our locations so that we're sitting there with our teams. Even if we have a small presence in some of these locations, they can look us in the eye and ask us questions, and we can be honest about, I have clarity on this, I don't have clarity on that, but let me go back and figure this out, you know? Mm-hmm. So being present, communicating, also communicating honestly when we don't have answers, and letting the team know that we will go back and try to get some of those answers and try to provide some of that clarity, right? I remember I did a town hall. I don't remember exactly at what point during these transitions, but when it got time for Q&A, someone said to me, they said, okay, Sam, I have a question for you. Who do you report to right now? And to be totally honest, at that exact moment in time, I wasn't sure. And I was like, okay, this is kind of embarrassing admitting to the whole company. I don't technically know exactly who I'm reporting to right now. But, my answer was, listen, I think it's going to be this person, but I'm not 100% sure. But you know what? It doesn't really matter, because here's what. Mm-hmm. That CISO at that large company I was telling you about is still expecting me to deliver what I had committed, right? Our vision hasn't changed, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get back to that, and I'll go figure out who I'm working for.
I love that. I also think there's an element of vulnerability and realness in that answer that I think can be probably powerful for the team, but still instill strength along the way.
Absolutely, and that's part of authentic communication, right? Is look, if leaders are human too, right? Leaders are fallible, and everyone knows that we're not going to have all the answers. So don't pretend that you do, right? And that produces an opportunity to have an authentic conversation with the organization. And in each one of those moments, what you get the space to do is to bring it back to what is within your sphere of control. What can you take action on? And the thing that I kept telling the team was, look, if we focus on our mission, if we focus on the commitments we've made, if we focus on our performance, and we keep delivering great performance, even as we're going through these changes, it puts me in a really great position and the management team in a really great position to go deliver the kind of outcomes for our business that we want to deliver, right? So it just increases the leverage that we have. So let's go focus on where we have agency and where we can keep performing.
I love that. You touched on another theme that I think is one that we're hearing from a lot of companies at all different stages, but is around how do you stay really customer centric? So you talked about, our customers are still expecting us to deliver. They don't care. Are there certain things that you did deliberately to keep the organization customer centric at that time, or even over time? I think it feels like it's increasingly an important DNA to build in an organization. So what are some of the things that you've learned to do to help the organization be very customer centric?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lily. And customer success as a field has really taken off. And at this point in time, any company, especially SaaS companies, need to have a very strong customer success function. So this whole concept of customer centricity is very, very top of mind, especially for businesses that have large portions of their revenue as recurring revenue. And, the few things that have been helpful for us as we've focused on customer centricity and tried to even amplify that concept inside our organization is storytelling around customers, right? Yes, we're providing some technologies and some capabilities to our customers, but what is it that they're trying to accomplish using those technologies? This past year, as an example, we had customers in the healthcare space that were creating applications that were for contact tracing, right? Or that were creating applications that are for vaccine distribution once the vaccine was going to be made available. these are customer stories that bring alive the real world results and deliverables and missions that our customers are trying to achieve, right? So it connects technology that we're delivering to a very important business goal. In this case, a business goal that was affecting all of humanity, right? It draws that connection. And when you draw that connection, suddenly you look at the decisions that you are making around features you're building in, or the user experience that you want to deliver, or a roadmap item you want to have, with a different degree of gravity, with a different degree of empathy, right? And so I found storytelling around what customers' missions are and what is it they're trying to achieve as an end result for their business through the use of our technology to be very, very helpful in that regard. And then the other thing that you do is you bring customers in to your organization to be a voice of the customer. So when we do our company meetings, when we do different kind of training sessions or bring the team together, often we will try to have somebody from the customer come in and talk to us about where we're serving their needs well and where are we not. Give us constructive feedback on where we can improve.
I love that example because it's very applicable or very tangible. So, practically speaking, in a training session or in a, company meeting or whatever it might be, you actually, physically, if you will, get that customer voice in the room. I love that.
Yeah. And this past year, I will say, and I'm noticing that there's a question around change as it relates to this past year in the chat here, but, and I think I know that's a topic you're going to get to, Lily. But this past year, I got to meet customers, spouses, pets, children, like extended family, right? Because we're all doing this over Zoom, and it created almost a different degree of connection and empathy, because I think we all showed up as humans first. And so I kind of feel like this last year almost forced all of us to approach it in a very human-centric way, first of all, and then a customer-centric way.
Well, let's go to that topic, because I think it is an important one, and you touched on it a little bit. But of course, the last year with COVID has caused all different types of transitions. From what I understand, you guys also had a very strong year, sort of 13% growth, 5 points higher than industry expected. I mean, it sounded like it was a pretty good year for you. So you mentioned two things in terms of learnings from the past year: human-centric first, then customer-centric. But any other big learnings or shifts in your own leadership approach managing such a large company during a pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, it was obviously totally unexpected for everybody, right? And as it was unfolding, there was more that was not known than was known, right? And I think we're all good at collecting data, synthesizing, getting to key takeaways, and formulating a strategy. But, I'm not an epidemiologist by any stretch, and I am not an economist. And here's a confluence of this public health crisis that could have some macroeconomic ramifications that we're all trying to read the tea leaves on, while everyone is concerned about their own physical health and safety. And by the way, you still have a business to run, and you still have commitments to make good on, and results to deliver, and so on and so forth. So it was daunting. There's no question about the fact that it was daunting. And in addition to some of the things that I've talked about around constant communication, which I made even more of a conscious effort to do that this past year, right? Like, I would write a note to the company just saying, hey, this weekend I went for a hike with my dog, because I just needed to stay connected, because I can't have those conversations around the microwave in the cafeteria, right? In addition to those sort of things, one other thing that I found helpful was reaching into the extended network, because nobody was going through this alone. We were all isolated from each other, but we were not going through this alone. Everyone, like literally every human being on the planet, was dealing with this. When's the last time that every human being on the planet has to deal with the exact same issue, right? And So that there was an opportunity there. And so I found myself connecting a lot more with fellow CEOs, other leaders in the Boston area through communities like, you guys have and Nurture. And I found that to be tremendously helpful because it meant that none of us had to try to figure it out on our own, right? So like maybe, what are you doing about remote work? How are you supporting people where they have childcare needs, but they also have work that they have to do during the day? What are some tools you've come up with? What are some techniques you've come up with? That information sharing and reaching into the network and learning from what other people had tried, what worked well, what didn't work well, was tremendously, tremendously helpful to me. So I think that's one of the things, in addition to, communicating authentically, communicating often, that served me well anyways, is harnessing the ideas and knowledge of others that were also going through the same thing. And then, laying out for the organization, what are the things that we're going to care about as we go through this, right? And we came up with 3 pillars. We said, we care about employees, like we want to focus on employee well-being as we go through this, because all of our lives have been very disrupted. We're going to care about customer well-being because, again, the needs for secure software didn't go away overnight, and our customers are also disrupted at a personal level in the same way that we are disrupted. So, customer well-being, and then our business well-being. How are we going to navigate our business during this time period of uncertainty where you don't really know what's happening macroeconomically? What are some prudent decisions that we're going to make? What are some even tough decisions we're going to make to give ourselves runway, to give ourselves resilience till the picture clarifies itself and we can go back and, make slightly different decisions? So we laid out those 3 pillars for the organization. Like, we're going to employee well-being, customer well-being, business well-being. And then that created a framework through which we could go come up with different initiatives, different techniques, etc.
I love that clarity of purpose and focus, I imagine, was helpful for the organization. A question that I'm curious about is, as you think about returning to normal, or new normal, I should say, whatever that looks like, are there pieces of these learnings or practices that you hope continue and that you will continue to bring into the organization? And I guess related to the 3 that you just laid out, are those still the same 3? How are you thinking about sort of the next version of those for this new chapter, which still has a whole world of unknowns? And what is hybrid? What is flexible? There's still we're still very much in transition.
Yeah, and it is still very much in transition, right? I think there's no question that there are learnings that occurred over the course of the past year that we're going to carry forward. No question. Just communicating more frequently, right? Communicating with some frameworks and structures in place so people can give themselves some sanity when everything else, feels insane, right? Like there are some real solid learnings on the communication front that I think we're going to definitely carry forward. We also proved to ourselves that we can stay productive working remotely, right? The thing that went on through the course of the year is the fatigue around just continuously working remotely increased over the time period, right? So I remember we did a survey in April or May, soon after we had all gone to remote mode, to check in with everybody and say, okay, how are you doing? How can we support you better? What can we do? And, essentially the survey results came back with like 90% of the people, or some number like that, saying, I'm just as productive working from home as I was before. Then in November, we did the survey again because we wanted to keep checking in. And I think that's a learning too, is that, doing quick pulse surveys on a particular topic, engaging sentiment, can be super helpful. So November, we repeated the survey, asked some of the same questions, and essentially the same number or similar number of people came back and said, just as productive working remotely as I was working in the office. But there was a much louder sentiment around, this is tiring. doing Zoom calls the whole day is exhausting. I miss seeing people. Brainstorming sessions can be really hard. There are some things that are just more effectively done when you are in person with everybody, right?
Right.
So that's now given us some data points to think about what does the future of work look like. And, I don't think that it's going to be fully in person or fully remote, right? Because there are elements of both ways of working that ultimately create a strong working environment. We haven't totally figured out exactly what it is going to be, but there's no question that we're going to take some of what we demonstrated to ourselves we can do well and see if we can carry that forward, and in doing so, giving ourselves a little bit more flexibility around how we work.
I think that's exactly right. That's what we're hearing from a lot of people. Is there's some good things here. How do we hold on to the good things in an intentional way, but also deliver on the things that people have been missing, or that maybe are sub-optimized in our current setup? So, do you guys have a return to work plan yet? You don't have to share if it's not public, but
we're working on it. I mean, for the anything that we do is like a post-summer thing, just because during summer schools are out and childcare is hard, so we don't want to transition. We're looking at more like around fall, where we start to go to some form of what can we do in person, what do we do remotely.
Yep, I'm hearing a lot of people on a similar timeline. Good. Well, if it's okay, I'd love to shift gears a little bit to another type of shift, which is around market shift. So, Veracode has been a leader in the application security solutions for a long time, and you've been able to stay ahead. And so I'm curious, sort of in this journey, what have been some of the keys to maintaining a leadership position? You said something interesting to me last week around, there's a challenge to getting to market leader, and then there's a challenge to staying. So, I'd love to understand a little bit about, what are some of the major shifts in the industry that you guys have had to adapt to in order to stay ahead? And can you share an example of some of the things that you do in order to stay at the top?
Yeah, so there's a lot encapsulated in that question there. Yeah. When you're trying to get to the leadership position, that feels like a daunting task, right? Yeah. And then when you get to the leadership position and you're trying to stay in the leadership position in a industry and a sub-segment of the industry like cybersecurity, which is as competitive as it is, that feels like a daunting task, right? So I think if you are in technology or in cybersecurity, you have to constantly be striving to be in the leadership position, even if you are already in the leadership position. So getting too comfortable, getting complacent is like not a good thing, right? Because change occurs very fast in technology, change occurs very fast in cybersecurity. So for us, it's don't ever get too comfortable and always stay scrappy, right? It is an ethos that I think we've followed. In terms of the shifts that have occurred, when we came to market in 2006, we were in stealth mode in 2006. We officially launched the company in 2007. The incumbent technologies that had preceded us were on-premise technologies. And so our innovation at the time was to do this as a SaaS offering. I think, it was before the term SaaS was really popularized, or cloud, or I think we called it our on-demand application security service or something like that, right? And so that was a change that we were initiating, and in part because what we were starting to see was scaling programs, application security programs in large enterprises was very difficult when you were doing that with a tools-based approach. So that was one of the first market shifts that I'd say we instigated, but also were responding to what we were seeing as a challenge in the technologies that had preceded us. And then I think more recently, the market shift that has occurred is, and it's been going on for the last few years, is security people did security, and everyone else, went along to the extent that they needed to, right? And I think with software security in particular now, the shift that's occurring is people are realizing that you have to do software security as part of the software development process. It doesn't really work so well if you try to bolt it on afterwards, or if you try to at the last minute show up with, oh, we got to test the software and find what the problems are, because then you're going to hold up your releases and you're going to create other problems for the business. So there's this real movement that gets referred to as shift left, which is really taking these security practices and embedding these security practices earlier in the software development lifecycle. And so that's the biggest shift. And that means you're bringing a whole community of developers along here as well. So you've got a different constituency whose primary job is to create compelling functionality, right, for their users. But we want to give them the ability to create compelling functionality with security built in an easy way, right? So I would say that's the most recent market shift. And, Lily, one of the things we're keeping a close eye on is, there's an executive order due to be issued from the Biden administration. It's imminent, anytime now, somewhat in response to the mega breaches we've heard about over the last few weeks and months. And, that's even before we saw the Colonial Pipeline attack, which is having a massive impact in the day-to-day lives of citizens on the East Coast of many states in the United States. So I think that's another thing as an industry that we're all keeping an eye on to see how does that start to change the conversation or narrative around this.
Thank you for mapping out those shifts. And I would just want to tease on the regulatory one briefly. How do you internally sort of plan or think about some of those potential implications? And for those who don't know, if there's sort of a quick, short version of what the potential implication might be for your business, but, given the political landscape can shift, it's not necessarily predictable. As a leader, how do you balance being anticipatory and prepared, but also given that there's sort of some unknowns?
Yeah, so this is like, there's obviously points of views that are held on a topic like cybersecurity that vary from administration to administration, right? But like, by and large, the industry knows what are the right things to do from a security perspective, right? Like this is not a new problem. It's a problem that continually evolves because technology continually evolves, right? But we've been dealing with cybersecurity for a long time, so there are some best practices, if I could use that term, that people know that any organization should implement. They are both on the prevention side of things, they're on the detection and response side of things, and there are, I would say, almost a lot of different compliance standards that people have to adhere to right now. If you are in financial services and you are operating in the state of New York, the New York DFS has a pretty stringent requirement they've come up with, the Department of Financial Services there, right? Then PCI is another standard that's been used for many, many years. And, if you're in the healthcare industry, there's HIPAA. And so there's a lot of variability in the standards and regulations that exist. And I think for us, how we think about it is like, what does good look like when you develop software securely? So those are the practices that we should allow our product to enable our customers to implement. And those are the practices that we should evangelize as we're talking to customers. And if compliance and standards catch up to that, great. But if compliance and standards don't catch up to that, we're still helping our customers do what good looks like with respect to software security, right? And I think sometimes regulatory efforts and standards, unfortunately, are catching up, right? versus being ahead of the curve. And so, okay, even so, it's great if we finally get there and we establish some common standards around how to do this. But in the meantime, software has been developed for a long time and software security issues have been dealt with for a long time. So through the collective knowledge of the industry, we can still guide customers to the right place. And then as standards catch up to that, great.
And I agree, there's sort of a catch up. Do you spend time as an organization trying to influence that from a regulatory perspective, or do you sort of focus on your business and will adapt if necessary?
So we get our founder and chief technology officer, Chris Wysopal, has been sought out by various bodies in the federal government, in standards bodies and so forth, to for them to get smart on like what are the issues we're dealing with, how should we be responding to this, what should standards look like, and so forth. So we engage with anybody that wants to learn more on this topic, that wants to create good standards on this topic. I wouldn't say that we go out of our way to do it, but we want to engage with the community as a whole, including people in standards bodies and in the government organizations that are trying to get their arms around this and determine what should be done moving forward.
Yeah, it's a fine balance and sort of how to engage and where
your voice should play. You may be surprised to learn. I think it was 25 years ago. It was definitely more than 20, and maybe as much as 25 years ago. Our CTO, Chris Weissopel, along with a few others, testified in front of a congressional committee on how the internet could be taken down in 30 minutes. That was over 20 years ago, Lily.
Wow.
So this conversation has been for a long time.
Not new. Very interesting. Well, I'm sure we could go down that topic for a while. And I do want to encourage folks, if you have questions, throw them into the chat. We'll start to get to them. But there were two more things I did want to ask you about. Going back to the idea of sort of staying scrappy as market shifts and as you need to adapt. Are there things that you do from a cultural perspective, from an organizational design perspective, or even just behaviors? How do you keep such a large organization scrappy? What are some of the intentional things that you've done?
Yeah. So there are a number of different things, right? Some are intentional, and then some are the ethos of the organization that develops as a result of intentional things that you do. So I do think that the tone that leadership sets matters, right? If the tone over time starts to veer into, we're the 800-pound gorilla, we're good, everything's awesome, right? You're going to create a tone of, you can relax a little bit, maybe introduce some complacency. That can never be the tone, right? So I always think of it as we should have the confidence of someone that has been a leader in our category. And if you use the Gartner Magic Quadrant as a tool to measure leadership, right, in 8 years in running or something like that, right? So we should have the confidence of someone that has achieved that leadership position and has held that leadership position for this time period. But we should have the humility to recognize that the world around us doesn't stay the same. It changes. And because things change, we constantly have to learn and adapt, right? So to me, it's a combination of those two things. We should be confident and proud of what we've achieved,
right?
But not get arrogant. We should have the humility to know we don't know everything. Things change, right? Someone's going to do something better. What can we learn from that? We're going to do something not as good as we should have. What can we learn from that, right? So it's a combination of those two things, because you want your organization to have that to have that fire to go out and compete and to win, and for that purpose you have to equip everybody with that self-confidence, but you also want us to be good listeners, and that's where the humility part comes in, right? So I think part of it is that the tone that you establish, and then part of it is what are the practices that you develop in your organization over time that methodically and consciously create an opportunity and a space to check in on how are we doing and what needs to stay the same and what needs to change. So when we became an independent company again, I'll say, when we became Veracode again in 2019, the exec team and I worked together and we came up with a set of leadership principles. And these are principles that are somewhat aspirational, but these are leadership principles that we as a leadership team aspire to and try to adhere to. And for that matter, anybody that has the privilege of being in a leadership position at Veracode and has responsibility for driving results through teams should adhere to. And Sometimes it's more aspirational than like living them every single day. But one of the leadership principles there is be deliberate yet emergent in strategy. And what we mean by that is that you have to have conscious thought around what is your strategy? Where are you going to play? How are you going to win? What are the unfair advantages that you're going to create for yourself vis-a-vis competition, which is a tough act, especially in cybersecurity, because of just how much innovation goes on in this space, right? But then we also talk about, like, if you set that plan in motion and then you're like, I'm good for the next fiscal year, we'll check back in when we start planning for the next fiscal year, that's not going to go so well. So where do you need to be emergent in strategy? Meaning where, when the rubber hits the road, when sparks fly, when new data points present themselves, how do you tune? How do you refine so that in some respects you are continually thinking about what we should be doing, right? So that's a very deliberate leadership principle that we introduced in the 6 leadership principles that we have to cater to this piece around scrappiness and constantly learning and adapting that you're referring to.
I absolutely love that framing, and that one in particular, I do think speaks exactly to the tone that you want to emulate and makes it a little bit more concrete. A question I have, and you spoke to a little bit, but I'd love to just probe a little bit further, is how do you check in on your team to see if you're living these principles or that specific example? So you talk about sort of laying out a strategy and then checking in on it. Do you bake it into your quarterly planning or road mapping? I mean, how do you check in? How do you check in to see if you're actually living this principle?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, and other ways, right? So every organization will have some kind of a cadence around setting the strategy and then seeing how you are executing against that strategy and planning and so on and so forth, right? Some do it in a very formalized way, some do it less formalized, some it's very heavyweight, some it's very, but there's some kind of a cadence that almost every organization has. When you were super early stage and when we were super early stage, the strategy was just go win customers, right? So like that makes sense to like go get some early customers, teach us like what the right thing to do is. But once you get to some, some degree of scale, you have to have a little bit more thoughtfulness and a cadence around that. So yes, there's a process which creates avenues for you to check in on it. But for me, it's also just being out there and listening, right? I do this, and I encourage anybody in leadership position in the company to do this, is to just pick up the phone and call, or Zoom these days, right? And just talk to somebody. How's it going? What's going on? What are you working on? And when we were all like in a physical space in an office, I call these random acts of micro-communication. It was so easy to practice these random acts of micro-communication because you could run into somebody in the elevator, or you could run into someone in the kitchen, or maybe you were flying for a customer meeting, so you're sharing a flight with somebody, and so you're stuck at an airport for a few hours, right? Those are great opportunities to learn and see how's our strategy, how's employee well-being, how are people doing, right? There's a book on leadership by John Maxwell, who's written a lot of books on leadership. Good leaders ask great questions. And that's one of the best books I've read, because one of the things he calls out is, good questions inform, great questions transform. And those moments give you the opportunity to try and ask those great questions, right? So that you're learning and you are connecting the dots. And except last year, none of that was happening, right? So I feel like that informal source of intelligence was a little challenged over the course of last year. So that's why it's like, okay, pick up the phone and call somebody and just talk to them and see what's going on, or observe the dynamic that's happening in a meeting. Who's talking, who's not talking, what topics are being talked about, what topics are not being talked about, right? And so it's just be a sponge. Be a sponge and observe and take it all in. And then you couple that with the more formalized practices that you've created in the organization, and you try to do it through a combination of that.
I love those random acts of micro-communication. I'm writing that down. Well, great. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, so I want to make sure we get to them. Jenny, do you want me to just read them? I can read Carlos's, or here we have one from Michael. So the question is, as you look ahead, how do you ensure your team is innovating and looking ahead of customers to the future market needs in DevSecOps?
Yeah, and I think for us it is again bringing in that voice of the customer, this time from the development side of the house, right? And so one of the things that I'm finding is that we have been in the process over the last couple of years to transition our products and our services to be utilized in the DevSecOps use case by really integrating into the development pipelines and understanding what developers are doing with the CI/CD toolchain and so on, and plugging into it in a really seamless way so that we're kind of almost transparent to their software development process. Security just happens as developers go through their pipeline and build and release code. But how do we encourage our team to be thinking with that DevSecOps mindset? And also, by extension, how do we encourage the security teams who we have historically engaged more with to think with that mindset, right? And so that is really inviting the development team into that conversation, right? So if we're doing a sales call with somebody, we insist that somebody from the development organization be in that conversation, right? Because if security is just trying to figure out how to do security, especially software security, and developers aren't involved, it's going to be really hard to get that done, right? When I was talking earlier about bringing customers in to speak to us, we're trying to bring people in from both the security side of the house and the development side of the house. When we're doing QBRs or we're doing some kind of a strategy session with the customer, we'll increasingly make sure that there's representation from both sides. We've got a community platform that we've created where we are creating topics and forums and conversations that are going to be more relevant for the developer community, right? So it's really introducing that voice into how we build our capabilities and how the security teams engage with that part of the organization.
Very, very helpful. I think there's some powerful lessons, particularly on the community side. It's something we're seeing a lot, particularly from a developer perspective, as a way to get them engaged, get their voice, because it's a transition, but we're seeing it more and more. I want to make sure we get to more questions. We've probably gone on that topic longer, but there was one from Carlos. Curious about approaches to hiring with a particular focus on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah. So hiring is by far, I think, the most important and the most difficult thing that anybody does in an organization. You are who your team is, right? You are who your team is. And another great book that I read is a book called Who. I can't remember the authors. It's all about hiring. It lays out a very prescriptive. Do you have it on your shelf there?
I actually literally have it right in front of me. So
I haven't. I don't know if you can see it, but it's one of the books back there. And it lays out a very, very prescriptive methodology for how you hire and so on and so forth. And even if you don't follow all of that to the nth degree of accuracy, there are some concepts that emerge from that are very helpful. Like having clarity on what is the job and what will constitute success in the job, 60 days in, a quarter in, a year in. Like, too often you kind of discover that as you're interviewing people. and it's like, well, maybe if we put a little bit more thought into that ahead of time, we could get smarter about who we're talking to and quickly, filter out people that make sense and people that don't make sense, right? So I think being more thoughtful about what is the job, and then more importantly, what results are you expecting that job to yield in what time frame can be a good thing, right? It's just as a simple technique. In terms of diversity and inclusion, I'm just going to start by first saying it's hard. It is really, really hard because I do think that there is underrepresentation in the tech sector in particular from a gender perspective, from an ethnicity perspective. So the pipeline of candidates is lower than we want it to be, right? I think that there are a couple of things that we do that make the problem worse. And then I think there are a couple of things we can do that could help improve it. I think we've over-rotated in our focus on looking for women and people from ethnic minorities in the STEM sector. Why do we not open up the net wider? Why are we over-rotating on STEM? The first cybersecurity company that I worked for, the woman who was the CEO of that company had a degree in English. My predecessor at Veracode, I think, had a degree in psychology and something else, right? There are plenty of fantastic leaders in technology companies and employees in technology companies that didn't come from the STEM background. So just my personal pet peeve is, let's not over-rotate so much on STEM when we are looking to hire people in general, but diverse candidates in particular, because especially for those early career positions, you are looking for some inherent qualities and characteristics more than domain knowledge. So the domain knowledge can be taught, right? So let's make it easier on ourselves by opening up the net wider there, right? And then I think the other thing that you can do is insist on a diverse slate. So I've had to build the executive team sort of again as we became Veracode again, because we went through all of these transitions. And for every role that I've hired, I make it very clear up front with the recruiters that we're using that I'm not going to make a hire till I've seen a diverse slate of candidates. So when you make that very clear up front, guess what? You're going to see a diverse set of candidates. And sometimes what might happen is, they may put forth candidates that are exactly what you want, but they may put forth candidates that have a slightly different domain, or they're maybe not quite as senior for the role that you're expecting. But I don't care, because by introducing this diverse candidate to that opportunity, you now also sent a message to that person that they can go vie for those opportunities, right? So there's a bigger kind of ripple effect that occurs from creating those kinds of practices, right? And then the third thing that I'll say is we participate every year in a study that McKinsey does. This is more focused on gender diversity than anything else, but McKinsey, along with the Lean-In Institute, does a study every year, Women in Technology, where we contribute our data, and there are like a few hundred organizations that contribute their data. And there's a report that's published that has guidance on how you can increase the representation of women in our organizations. And so we are simultaneously contributing our data to have a richer report be produced at the end of the day, but also are then benefiting from receiving those learnings. And then that gives us the motivation to go work with organizations, recruiting organizations that are very specifically focused on bringing more underrepresented minorities into the tech sector.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, the Lean-In work, and it's very powerful. In Boston, I'm involved with All Raise, which is doing something similar, but specifically for founders and funders, similar. But the data and the best practices piece can be very powerful. And some of many
And you make it part of the conversation in the organization. I'll just quickly mention one of the things we did last year is we do hackathons, and as part of it was either part of the hackathon or we did it as a standalone thing. We got this app, Charity Miles, and used it to have the organization raise funding for Resilient Coders, which is an organization in Boston that is trying to have representation from African American and Latino youth in technology in particular, right? Mm-hmm. So you introduce those kinds of things into what happens in the organization, so the conversation is present.
Right. Well, it's a long way to go, but I love the way that you're thinking about it and mapping it out. We have just a few minutes left. We have one more question, I think. We have a question from Wayne. Would enjoy if Sam could comment on her experience and approach with market or product pivot. The initial target industry or customer base didn't work out.
Okay, so so the example that comes to mind right off the bat, right, is so when you talk about strategy, it's almost as important to know what not to do, right, versus what to do. and your strategy is almost defined by what not to do. And I can think of actually two examples, one where we made the right decision on what not to do and one where we did not. And, we are, if I just use our example, we are very, we are on the side of the development lifecycle that relates to creating software versus the side of the development lifecycle that relates to operating software, right? We're more about building security into your software development process. We do some things that are once the application is live and running in production, but more of what we do is left of actually the application running operations. We're more development than operations. You can think of it that way, right? And we almost made a move where we did an acquisition. This is several years ago now, which would have put us into the operations piece in a more concerted way, and we pulled back not at the last minute exactly, but we pulled back as we dug into it and did our diligence, because what we realized was that the buyer type is a little different. And one of the things I found is even when you feel like there's technology synergy, right? This was doing operational application security. We were doing application security for development. Ultimately, it's all application security. Of course, it makes sense on paper. It would give us more coverage, breadth, blah, blah, blah. Everything made sense. The buyer type is different. We don't know how to have a conversation with that buyer type. We know how to have a conversation with this, right? So there was an element of organizational readiness for us that didn't exist, and organizational competency for us was more on the development side than the ops side, right? And so this was, of course, many, many years ago. And so we didn't do that, and that was the right call. Now, today, we have ventured more into that area, and we know how to have good conversations here and good conversations there. But at that point in time in our company's trajectory, that was the right call. And I think the other example is we got into the mobile privacy space again many years ago. We thought privacy, security, like two sides of the same coin. Of course, it makes sense. We should, do mobile privacy. Well, it didn't make sense, right? People use us to bring security to their mobile applications, and privacy just didn't work as a whole standalone piece. So we tried to make that pivot, and we realized that it makes more sense to actually just incorporate that into the security findings that we're providing customers. And that as a standalone business doesn't make a lot of sense.
Very helpful. That's a good example. I could probably talk another hour on that topic alone, but we only have a couple more minutes here. I guess I'd love just to close at two questions. One was, a little bit more on the self-reflection on leadership development, and you emerged as a leader from within the organization to then sort of take over as CEO, which is not always easy, particularly around sort of peers and relationship management. But for those on the call, we have a lot of young CEOs or founders or folks in various stages of their own professional and leadership growth. As you reflect back, what is something in your own professional development that you prioritized on your path to CEO, and something that you're glad that you invested in yourself?
So I think for me, it would be seeking and working with mentors. I think that's probably the thing that has helped me in my personal growth and my development more so than anything else. Because a good mentor will, first of all, be honest with you, right? Yep. And second of all, especially when you are either having self-doubt or maybe imposter syndrome or something along those lines, like, a good mentor will help you see the big picture and pull you out of that. Or tell you, this particular area, you're lacking the skill or the experience or the domain knowledge. And so, okay, then go do something about it. And then you won't be lacking the skill or the domain knowledge or whatever, right? And so I think seeking and working with mentors has probably been the most transformational for me in particular. And just being connected to that broader network is what's helped shape me.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I guess last very quick question, what is something that you are most excited or optimistic for the rest of 2021?
Good question. I'm really excited to go out and have dinner in a restaurant with other people. I look forward to that. But no, you know, I'm very excited to use the learnings of the last year to work differently, and as a result, work in a more connected fashion and a better fashion moving forward, where we're able to be flexible around people's lives and people's work and still get more done, right? Because we were forced into that situation, and we taught ourselves that you can do that. So I'm excited to bring those learnings to what the next normal is going to look like.
Wonderful. Well, we are right on time, Sam. We so appreciate your time, your insight. I have pages of notes. I'm sure everyone on the call does as well. So thank you very, very much. Congrats on all you've done. And we very much.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Great chatting with you, Lily, and thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Sam. Just wanted to share with the rest of the group as well a few other events that we have coming up. If others are interested in joining us for those. Again, thank you so much, Sam. There we go. Corey Thomas, who's a chairman and CEO of Rapid7, is joining us on June 9th for another Fireside chat. So please, it would be great to see you there as well. And then coming up on the 19th to 20th, so in a week from today, is our big virtual Boston Reconnect. Opportunities for you to not only hear from great speakers, but also connect with other members of the community and have conversations and dive into topics that are exciting for the community to discuss. So really hope to see you there. Check out our websites for those links. And with that, thank you so much, Sam. Learned a ton, took a lot of notes. It was so wonderful having you here.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day, everyone.